All right, so just a quick introduction for those of you who might not know me. I am Cecily, pronouns she, they. I was the president of the SCSU chapter last year, and now I'm the director of chapter programs for the leadership team. So that's been a fun transition. A quick agenda on what we're going to be talking about today. First, we're going to be going over the problem. So, what is homelessness in the context of college campuses? Next, we're going to be going over long and short-term effects. So, what does it do? What it do on college campuses? And then next, we're going to be going over potential solutions and things that have been suggested to address this issue. And then we're going to have a quick little debrief at the end. If at any point anyone has questions, comments, whatever, feel free to interrupt me. Feel free to type it in the chat. I'll have my email and stuff at the end. So if you guys want to talk to me afterward, that is also cool. Yeah, so let's just get straight into what is the problem. First things first, before I get into anything, I wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of intersectionality. Intersectionality is basically the idea that all social issues, human rights issues are intersectional. No issue is independent on its own. All of us carry so many different identities, and all of our combinations of identities are unique. And so it's really important to remember that everything we talk about in this workshop is an additional layer to everything we already know about homelessness. And what that means is college students who are experiencing homeless situations experience the same struggles as anyone else experiencing homelessness, but in addition, they have different. Oh, give me 1 second. There we go. In addition to those struggles, they have a unique set of obstacles that come with being in college or being a student. And so just keep that in mind. Yeah. Here next, we just have some of the general numbers that come with this issue. First, 1.3 million students from kindergarten to 12th grade, so that's kindergarten through high school, experience homelessness in the United States each year. I decided to keep some of the stats from K through 12 just because I thought it would be a good precedent or context for homelessness in college. Next, 10 to 15% of students are homeless at any given time. In the 2015 and 2016 year for the FAFSA, 31,948 students checked off that they were experiencing housing insecurity or homelessness. And this is considered a huge undercount because the qualifications that FAFSA uses to count someone as experiencing housing insecurity are very strange and nondescript. Next, 12% of CSU students experience homelessness and housing insecurity. This was actually done, I think, in 2013. It was a report put out by the CSUs. CSUs, obviously, California State Universities. SCSU is one of them. And they put out this report that said that 12% of their students had or were experiencing homelessness. Next, 30 to 50% of college students in community colleges experience homelessness. And so that's a much higher rate than four-year colleges. And that's for many reasons that we'll also get into. And then this one is interesting. It's just individuals between 18 to 28, 4.6 of them have experienced homelessness. And I decided to include this because this stat is just for 18 to 28 across the board, in college or not. But I thought it was interesting because obviously between the ages of 18 to 28, people are bound to be in college, if not, well, obviously not all of them, but some of them are. And so, yeah, these are just some of the numbers. Next, we have some of the contributing factors to why there's so much housing insecurity in students who are in college. First, we have tuition. Tuition has shot straight through the roof in the last 40 years. It's increased by, I think, 213% since 1987 to 1988, and over 65% since the year 2000. And if you think about it, that's crazy. That's not cool. And it's an enormous contributing factor to why this is such a huge issue. And then for housing, similar to tuition, the cost of student housing has increased in similar rates. Both the cost of tuition and housing have increased way faster than general inflation in the economy. And so basically what that means is tuition and housing are rising way faster than wages are. And then finally, we have financial aid. State and federal financial aid grant programs have not increased at the same rate as tuition and housing. If you guys aren't familiar with the Pell Grant, that's like the most broadly used grant that the federal government gives students. And so when that was created in 1965, it was meant to fully cover the cost of community college, and it did. And now it only covers around 60% of community college and less than 50% at a 4-year, like SDSU, CSD, UCR. And so grants are nowhere near covering as much as they were meant to, and what they're meant to pay for is way more expensive. And then next, there are some things we do know about homelessness in college campuses. I'll get into why we don't know as much as we should in the next slide, but what we do know is that students who are formerly homeless consistently score lower than their housed peers, and this is a problem that accumulates over time. Next, teachers tend to not want to teach at schools with high student mobility, and what student mobility is the flow of students in and out of schools. So what that is basically students, new kids at school, kids moving around, and that is correlated with homelessness because people who are homeless experience housing insecurity, and so they're moving around to different places, switching schools often. And teachers tend not to want to teach at schools with high student mobility because it makes obviously like staying to a curriculum harder, like they can't build the same relationships with their students. And so that's a huge issue. Next, women are more likely to experience housing insecurity in higher education than men. It's still super high for both, but women are a little higher. And then for Black people, Southeast Asian people, and multiracial people, there are even higher rates of housing insecurity in college. And then same with students over the age of 25, as opposed to students 21 and under. And obviously, it shouldn't be obvious, but it is. Individuals raising children have higher rates of housing insecurity, and women of color, specifically raising children, experience homelessness at disproportionate rates when it comes to college. And so that's what we know. One of the biggest issues regarding this topic is we don't know. There's a huge lack of data and research. The number of college students experiencing housing insecurity is not tracked at the national level, rarely any level, state, city, it's not really tracked. Schools themselves, very few of them track this data. And really just critical research is needed to analyze how specifically homelessness affects different minorities in higher education. So BIPOC, LGBTQIA+, women, undocumented folks, and those experiencing poverty, and so many other marginalized groups that should be studied more in depth themselves. Like I said earlier about intersectionality, all of these different intersections of people experience different problems, and so it's really honestly harmful to group them all together into the same experiences. And then last year there's a lot of research on K through 12 homelessness, but not in post-secondary education, which is college. And this is the reason because for some reason, well, it makes sense because so right now the government is mainly focused on getting higher high school graduation rates because obviously high school comes before college. But that doesn't make either issue more or less valid. And so there does need to be more research done on that. All right, so really quick, I wanted to jump into a discussion. I know all of us, I'm pretty sure, were or are in college. And so I really wanted to hear your thoughts on, does everything I just mentioned match what you've seen or experienced on your own campuses? And how does this make you feel? What do you think about this? Do you have any thoughts? I have the power to call on people if no one volunteers. Anybody?
Yeah, I can say something about like on-campus housing, I guess. Like you were saying how tuition all that skyrockets. I dormed my first year at SCSU, and I felt like the housing prices to dorm there was like way too expensive. I was paying like almost 1,800 every month, which is about 1,000 more than I pay right now in my apartment. And SCSU has like the rule that you have to be dorming, I think, 2 years on campus. So a lot of people are forced to just like and a lot of people don't get the same FAFSA. A lot of people get less FAFSA. And out of state housing, I mean, out of state tuition is also like 3 times as expensive. So yeah, I've definitely noticed the skyrocketing of tuition.
Yeah, I was in the exact same situation as you in terms of how much I was paying for dorms versus how much I'm paying to live here. It's honestly ridiculous how big the disparity is, especially considering in like most dorms you don't even have your own bathroom or kitchen or shower for that matter, and so it's pretty ridiculous. Does anyone else have anything they would like to share? One more person? Can we get one more
Just
person?
to I can just to add to Alan's point, with raising housing costs, I know that when they implemented sophomore success, they bought out Aztec Corner, and I think originally prices there were like 1,000 something, but then they didn't change anything about the complex itself, but they just forced students to live there at a higher price, which I definitely contributes to higher cost of living and stuff like that.
That is a very good point. And really quick, I just wanted to share one of my personal experiences. I used to work at the 24/7 section of the library on campus, and so obviously it was open 24/7. And I worked a lot of overnight shifts, so that was 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. And because it was 24/7, a lot of people experiencing homelessness would come there to sleep at night and do whatever they needed to do. And they were able to do this because they were technically students at SDSU. And so it's kind of crazy how, to me, every time I saw these people, like at a certain point, like we had a rapport with each other, like we knew them, we had like constant communication with these people. And it was super interesting to see how the student was more or the school was more willing to count these people as students and let them take like one class as opposed to focusing on what they really needed or what they really needed from the school, which was housing support. And so that's just my personal experience from working at SDSU. Yeah, does anyone else have anything else to share?
To add on what you were saying, Cecily, I had a similar experience. I used to live at penthouse apartments, which was pretty close to campus. And going to park under in our garage, I noticed somebody rummaging through the trash. I didn't think much of it. I was just thinking they were taking their trash out because I noticed she had a bike with her. She had her laptop. And it kind of clicked once I got into my apartment. This might be an individual facing homelessness. And so I packed some food or whatever I could get. This is when I wasn't as familiar with mustard seed yet. So I didn't have any resources with me or anything to provide her. So I went back down and I gave her some food. And she was unfortunately facing homelessness. And it's just shocking because it made me think this might be somebody that I sit next to in lecture. And I don't realize these things. And knowing she has expensive items with her too, like her bike and her laptop, and she's carrying everything. So that was my first experience of being more aware of what's happening.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, unfortunately, that's not an uncommon thing to see around college campuses, which is, obviously what we're hoping to change here. Um, does anyone have any last words they would like to share before we move on? Nada? Zilch? Alrighty. All right, so next we're going to go into the long and short term effects of homelessness in the context of college students. Another important reminder, I just wanted to let y'all know that not all situations are the same. When I'm talking about all of these effects and when I'm talking about, honestly, anything in general, the various effects of homelessness on individuals is important, and it's important to remember that everyone's situation is unique. Not every single effect we talk about will apply to everyone who's going through this, but more importantly, not everything that people experience who are going through homelessness. We're not going to be talking about everything they experience because that's just impossible. There's like 10 million things. We got an hour. Um, and the most important thing is that it's harmful to keep just a specific set of experiences in your mind as valid or true, because this really restricts the different types of support that we can provide for people or create to support these people. And it's also just generally bad to invalidate anyone's experience. So don't do that. Cool. So first we have effects on education, but not all of them, like I just said. First we have engagement. Students who experience homelessness face more barriers when trying to engage with professors, extracurriculars, socializing with peers, and accessing school resources. And I think this one's pretty obvious just because, it's difficult for them to be around campus. They're always moving around. And in general, they just have more things to worry about if they're worried about where they're going to sleep at night. I don't think, extracurriculars aren't the first thing on someone's mind. Next, we have grades. Students who were formerly homeless consistently scored lower than their housed peers. And this was a study, I think, in 2015. And this, like I said earlier, this is a negative impact that persists over time if not addressed. And the study also found that students experiencing housing insecurity were way more likely to drop out than their housed peers. In parentheses, I just put Maslow's hierarchy of needs because this really like correlates between the two. How are people going to worry about, their homework when they don't have a roof over their heads? Next, we have learning. And this one study that I found applies to K through 5 students, but I think it's really significant in how you can obviously see how it travels as someone ages and becomes college age. And so a study with K through 5 students showed that students experiencing trauma tended to have lower standardized test scores, increased delinquent behavior, and more frequent referrals to special education. And they also found that this type of trauma is associated with cognition errors and negatively affecting reading and writing, as well as issues storing and accessing new information. And so there's a lot of mental health issues that come with experiencing homelessness. Obviously, there's a lot of trauma that goes into it, which we'll get more into in a bit. But it's really important to note that just there are tangible, actual effects that come from this. It's not something that you can just try harder in school, do your homework. There are actual cognitive, behavioral issues that can come with this type of trauma. Next, we have, like I said, effects on mental health, but again, not all of them. First, we have isolation. Experiences in isolation often lead to emotional stress that distract from learning. The shame individuals often feel can result in students hiding their situations from peers and instructors. Students experiencing insecurity rarely seek guidance from advisors and instructors. And that last part is really significant, just because it's really the fault of stigma, right? People don't want to share what they're going through because people judge them. People are judgy, and it sucks, but it's what happens. And it's honestly like a huge barrier when it comes to anyone asking for any type of support. And so next we have multiple traumas. Homelessness and housing insecurity may involve multiple traumas, including loss of stability, exploitation, substance abuse, and fractured relationships. Even after stability gets reestablished, the traumas experienced often affect how individuals perceive self and future, as well as their ability to engage in the educational process. And like I said earlier, like experiencing homelessness is a traumatizing experience. And like homelessness outside of college, there are many factors that go into it, which, can be exploitation, fractured relationships, substance abuse, etc. And these things, like I said, cross over into those experiencing it in college. And similarly, these traumas come or follow someone through their entire life. Next, we have toxic stress. In a study of formerly homeless students in 2016, they found residential instability had a direct correlation with not feeling safe or secure, with negative impacts on mental health, physical health, and self-confidence. Toxic stress during childhood or adolescence can affect the individual's brain architecture in ways that negatively influence academic engagement, include self-regulation, cognitive availability, and relationship development. And so toxic stress is basically the idea that there are many different forms of stress, not all of them are bad, but once it gets to toxic stress, it is when it can have actual cognitive repercussions that prevent someone from learning to their full capacity. Next, we have food insecurity. This might not seem like mental health at first, but like toxic stress, lack of access to food while attending college has a negative impact on cognitive functioning, obviously, because you're not getting the healthy nutrients that you need. In particular, students may experience physical or mental fatigue, inability to concentrate, and anxiety or irritability, which influence students' abilities to academically engage. Students experiencing food insecurity are 15 times more likely to have failed a class than their peers with food security. And so this one's a really significant one. One cool thing that I've seen at SDSU is the food pantry was created to kind of address this. I don't know if they have similar programs at UCR or UCSD. I hope so. But the food pantry at SDSU has been pretty cool about this. Cool. Next, we're going to get a little more into trauma. Again, these are not all of the effects of trauma, but just some of them. First, again, like I mentioned earlier, we have toxic stress. Trauma associated with toxic stress can affect cognition needed to use higher order thinking. The brain may end up solely focused on the trauma, preventing the ability to focus and retain new information. And so what that means is basically, if you're experiencing trauma from being unhoused, experiencing homelessness, how are you going to worry about retaining what your professor is telling you when you don't know like what's going on tonight? So yeah. Next, we have executive functioning, which is impulse control, working memory, and mental flexibility. Studies have shown that trauma can affect the use of all of these things, which are clearly essential when it comes to learning. And then next, we have flight, fight, and freeze. Individuals who experience trauma may have an overactive flight, fight, and freeze response, which can influence a student's ability to appear and respond in classroom settings, which basically means as a result of this trauma and this overactive response, it can be difficult to show up to class or participate in class, which is, participation grades exist. And so this is a really limiting thing when it comes to students. Cool. And we're moving a little quickly, but let's jump into another discussion. Can anyone here come up with any short or long-term effects that we haven't already mentioned? If so, what are they? If not, what do you think about the ones that we just talked about? Anybody? Should I call on someone? Alrighty, I guess I will. Let's go. Ryan.
Okay, one thing I thought of is that, like, I don't know, just, okay, for example, let's say someone who doesn't have stable housing is in, like, sociology, like, that's their major, for example. So, like, it deals a lot with, like, social issues that you're talking about, like, on a daily basis in class. So I feel like that might, like, extend the trauma even more because you're talking about stuff that you're going through, like, on a daily basis, like, in your class. So there's literally, like, no escape from it. And then also, like, the professor might assume, that, like, everyone talking about it is housed, when in reality, like, it's the opposite. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes complete sense. I feel like, especially right now, I feel like a lot of professors might not be the most aware of what their students might be going through in light of the pandemic. But hopefully we can do better. Anyone else want to add on to that? Can we get one more person, two more people?
So something that I was thinking about, especially during this specific pandemic, is everything has transitioned to online. And that could be another like major barrier is you have to get access to the internet. And a lot of the cafes and stuff that usually provide free internet are closed, and there isn't an easy way to get that internet access. So that could be another barrier that one would be really uncomfortable to talk about. And maybe this isn't necessarily just like the college level, but like if you're like in K through 12, I know a lot of teachers' responses to this is they give the students a packet instead. So they're like increasing the gap of education, because when you don't have that dialogue and that discussion, it's a lot harder to learn.
That's a very good point. And I feel like that goes even beyond just Wi-Fi. Like some people just don't have computers at home and they depend on like computer labs at school, and those are obviously closed. The library is closed, and that can be a huge barrier to even just knowing what homework is. And so that is a very good point, that in light of the pandemic, all of these issues are worse. Does anyone else have anything else to add? Nada? Alrighty. Janelle, did you want to say something?
It's kind of to add on to what Julia said too. Also thinking about like students that experience disabilities, kind of connecting it to one of the classes I'm taking. Some students may depend on another teacher to kind of like help if they experience like a learning disability. They may depend on like those type of resources, like an interpreter or another like special education teacher to help them out. And I think without school or like these public services, they're unable to have access to it and making it more difficult for them. So
that is also a very good point that I didn't even think of. That is again like a huge barrier for anyone experiencing disabilities, and hopefully there are ways around that. But I can see why it would be an enormous barrier to education for a lot of people.
I was also going to add that students that are from K through 12, that their parents don't speak English, it's hard for them to even translate like the homework assignments. And like if the children don't understand, that creates like probably like one of the biggest barriers, because if they already don't understand like the homework, then how are they going to learn if there's no one at home that can explain it to them?
Yeah, and like I mentioned earlier about intersectionality, like language barriers, disability barriers, those are all issues that affect not only students who are experiencing homelessness, but just people experiencing homelessness in general. These are huge barriers for all of them. Cool. That was a very nice little discussion we had. If no one has anything else to add, we'll get going. Next, we have potential solutions. I must warn you, there are not many of them that have been proposed, or any ideas that have been proposed. So if you guys have any, act on them. Okay. So some ideas that have been proposed / implemented. First is, I mentioned earlier, food pantries. SCSU has one, and many others also do. Some schools have implemented food pantries as a response to food insecurity and provide for their immediate needs. But the problem is this does not address the structural or systemic deep-rooted causes of this lack of basic needs. Next, there is SPOCs, and that stands for single point of contact. And what that means is the school would provide a single point of contact for students experiencing housing insecurity. And essentially that would be like a case manager for students experiencing homelessness. And this person would be open to students, openly available to students in order to limit shame and anxiety that comes with having to continuously tell your story and tell your situation to different people, and having them validate or invalidate your experiences. Rather than doing all that, you would just go through one person, and then they would make the appropriate communications or whatever that your case needs. And that's been implemented in some schools, which is cool. Next, we have federal policies. The federal government doesn't have a comprehensive policy to address homelessness or housing insecurity in college students. There are a lot of policies regarding homelessness in K through 12, because like I said, efforts so far have been focused on improving high school graduation rates, which makes sense because high school comes before college. But at the end of the day, these are both groups of people that are experiencing trauma that need help. Next, we have trauma-informed campuses, which is an idea that has been proposed. It's an idea to foster a trauma-informed campus, obviously, that is constantly aware of the needs and traumas of its students in order to better understand and support the many, many different situations and traumas that can come with housing insecurity and homelessness. And that's just an idea that has been like put out there. I don't think anyone's done it yet. It'd be cool if someone did. Yeah, and unfortunately, these four are like the only proposed slash implemented ideas I could find regarding homelessness on college campuses. I wish there were more to share. But unfortunately, like I said earlier regarding the lack of data and research, there's just like no information out there about this, which obviously needs to change, and we got to do better. So that was really short section, but can any of us come up with ideas for potential solutions or ways to support students who are currently experiencing homelessness or housing insecurity?
Kind of have a solution, not really like necessarily the homelessness, but this kind of came up today. Like, I know how we have the food pantry on campus, just stuff like that, because if people aren't trying to figure out how they're going to eat, they have ways to save that money for something else, like finding housing and stuff like that.
That is a very good point, and that I feel like is kind of what MSP tries to do or did when we had outreach, when we helped, our different partners at their different locations. We tried to provide, short-term support in order to be able to help them with their long-term goals. So that's really the goal. Does anyone else have anything they want to add on to that?
I think also referring people to the economic crisis response team, because they have a housing stability coordinator, and also the person that is the director of it also is a social worker. So they have connections to a lot of resources within San Diego that are specifically for students as well.
Yeah, and I feel like that's also another barrier that not only college students face, but like not a lot of people know about the economic crisis response team, and not a lot of people, I bet like barely anyone knows about the housing stability caseworker they have, and so the lack of information is also a huge barrier when it comes to trying to get out of a homeless situation. Does anyone else have anything to add?
So this is more of an abstract concept, but it has to do with internet availability. And so I'm from like a pretty small town, and we recently passed a like ordinance through our city council. So one of our main public parks would provide free internet access from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Like the city council members worked with a local like internet provider. And so they set up a tower and it provided free internet. So that way kids who, because like a lot of elementary schools right now are like checking out laptops and things to like give out for the year so that way they can attend class. But one of those main barriers is like if we don't have a home or internet at our home, it doesn't really help much. But then with internet being free at these like local public parks, and mind you, it's like from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. so it doesn't get misused. But it provides both like parents an opportunity to do their work while their children have an opportunity to do their work. There's space to social distance and you're getting outside. And so I'm just wondering like if there's ways for us to push things like that in San Diego, because there's a ton of parks that are wide open. And if that were an opportunity, that would kind of help counteract the fact that the library is closed and it's hard to get that free internet.
That's a very good point. What city are you from?
Arroyo Grande, California. It's like right by San Luis Obispo.
Oh, very nice. That's a really cool thing that I have not heard of yet. Does anyone else have any similar experiences they would like to share? Nada. We're getting close to the end of the presentation. The next thing is just closing words. So if no one else has anything to say, we will get into that. Alrighty. So to close, just a quick recap. Homelessness amongst college students is a very critical issue that affects an uncertain amount of people, but we know it's a lot. We don't know exactly how many because, again, lack of data and research. There are numerous short and long-term effects on students that need to be addressed while simultaneously working to address the root of the problem. There's really no point in only, addressing the symptoms and not the illness. And so while some ideas have been implemented and put out there, it's pretty obvious, especially in light of the pandemic that's highlighted, all of our problems. It's clear that this isn't a problem that is going anywhere anytime soon. So I really encourage you, if you guys want more information, look into it. If you need support, hit me up. And remember that obviously MSP is always here for you if you're experiencing any sort of housing insecurity issue. Don't hesitate, if you're comfortable, to reach out to chapter leadership. I'm pretty sure you're all familiar with your boards. If not, here I am. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you need any support. We are here for you. But yeah, that is essentially the end of this workshop. I know it was a lot shorter than last time. Does anybody have any questions, comments, concerns, criticisms they would like to share? Did anyone learn anything new? Learn anything they already knew?
I think we should give a big shout out to Cecily for that presentation to Round of Snaps. Did an amazing job.
Thank you. Alrighty, y'all. If no one has anything else to share, thank y'all for coming. There's my email number and just the MSP website. If you guys want to learn more. And yeah, I am always open to talk. And thank y'all for listening to me talk for 45 minutes. It's been an honor.